Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us for another episode of STEM Girls Virtual. On this show, we talk about different careers in the STEM fields, those fields being science, technology, engineering, and math. Today on the show, we have If Then Ambassador, inventor, author, and biomedical engineer, Arlyne Simon. Arlyne, thank you for joining us today.
Hi, Emily. Thank you so much for inviting me. I'm really happy to be here.
Yeah, we love having you. And today's also a special episode because we have high school intern Sophia McCrary, a senior at Mount Notre Dame, with us. Sophia, thanks for joining us. Hi.
Oh,
Yeah. Yeah, hi. Arlyne, so there's a lot of things I want to talk to you about. You're a very busy person, but you are a patented inventor. So can you tell us what you've invented and what does it mean to be a patented inventor?
Sure. So I became an inventor in about 10 years ago while I was a graduate student at University of Michigan. And what I invented is a blood test that detects when cancer patients are rejecting a bone marrow transplant.
Oh, wow.
And I am very passionate about the field of cancer diagnostics, more from a personal reason, because I have lost family members for the disease, and some of my family members are currently diagnosed with some form of cancer. And so I think that was probably one of the motivation factors for working with a team of researchers at University of Michigan to come up with that technology. And in addition to that, I think being an inventor really means that you love the ideation process. You're constantly brainstorming. And I do that today in my day job as a biomedical engineer. And when you know that your idea is worth patenting, is there really like three things that you check off. Is the idea useful? And what that means, are you actually coming up with an idea that is solving a real world problem? And the second thing is the idea new? So for a patent, you can either create completely new technology or you can improve upon an existing technology. And so when you ask yourself, is the idea new? That's really what you're trying to figure out, has somebody else filed a provisional patent on that? So for instance, like maybe a month or so ago, I was in a brainstorming session with some of my colleagues because we're always trying to come up with a new technology within the healthcare space. And we had a truly brilliant idea for the telehealth world. I mean, right now we're living through a pandemic and patients are typically reaching out to their doctors for remote visits.
Mhm.
And so one of the ideas we had was really to advance the world of telehealth. And when we did a quick Google search, we found out that, the idea was invented a few years ago, and actually last week, a company made that solution public. So on one hand, you may feel a little bit bummed because the great idea you had was already invented. But on the other side, you know that you are on the right track in how you think about things. And so it's really exciting to kind of encourage you to keep doing so. Anyway, the third thing on the checklist is the most tricky one, which is the idea non-obvious? And so what that means is, say that a crayon was invented
Mhm.
and you have this idea, oh, let me invent a crayon wrapper, the paper that wraps around the crayon. Well, that's not really an invention because it's just paper. You're just modifying the paper for a different use case. But if you continue that same train of thoughts and you say, okay, well, paper already exists. What are some of the problems with paper? Is there unrippable paper? Because kids may like tear the crayon
Mhm.
wrapper. And then by going along that trajectory of thought, then you realize that that unrippable paper may not only be applicable to crayons, but it may be applicable to pages in a book and so forth. And so that's really what it means to become a patented inventor, making
Yeah.
sure that your idea has those three qualities.
Oh, wow. Wow, thank you for telling a personal anecdote. So thank you for that. And you've covered a little bit about you're a biomedical engineer, but for those of us who may not know what that is, can you explain what a biomedical engineer is and what they do?
Sure. So biomedical engineering is one of the broadest engineering disciplines, I think. And so if you are just curious about how the body works, so that's the biology element to it, and you like engineering, which is more building new technologies, biomedical engineering is really the bridge between the two. So we ask ourselves, can we use technology to improve healthcare? And so because it's so broad, if you think of every part of your body, from your brain to your eyes, to your chest area, to your toes, there is a biomedical engineer who's studying or specializing in that field. And so for me, my career path has been interesting in the sense that I dabbled in biofuels. I worked in invented the technology in cancer diagnostics. I designed the syringes at some point. And now, well, before that, I designed supercomputers. And now I'm designing how to build medical imaging equipment like ultrasounds and CAT scans. And so, what in biomedical engineering, you truly leverage your love for healthcare and figure out new technologies or improve upon existing technologies that really help save people's lives. And so, again, in my role with designing medical imaging equipment, we work with device manufacturers who actually make the CAT scans and ultrasounds. But because I work in a tech company, I work with a team of computer architects. And so we help figure out which processors, which would be the brain of the computer, would be best for optimal performance. So if you were to get an ultrasound, a mom is pregnant, she's laying on the bed, the nurse or the technician is rubbing the ultrasound transducer in her belly. And the intent is really to look at the baby, how the baby is positioned, and to measure, the length of the baby to make sure the baby is growing properly. Well, the physician does, or the nurse doesn't really care about all the computing gizmos in the computer. But what they care about is being able to see that image very clear with high resolution. And they want to see the image quickly. And then the mom who's laying on the bed, she also wants to see the image. So that's why in the room, you may have the technician having their own viewing station. And then the mom laying has a screen like right in front of her. And so the things that we think about is something called latency. How fast does that image get acquired and then displayed on the screen? And so we have to think about the network connectivity that we implement into these technologies. And so those are the things that I think about in my current role as a biomedical engineer in a computer tech company.
Yeah, no, that's awesome. Yeah.
Thank
Yeah,
you.
I was speaking with another If Then ambassador earlier this year, Helen Tran, and Helen she's a chemist working on making technology stretchable and recyclable. And we got to
Yes.
talking, and I'm a type 1 diabetic, so I use an insulin pump. So
Mhm.
I always find biomedical engineers and things like really fascinating because insulin pumps are like this big now, and they used to be a backpack that you wear on your
Yes.
back. So now that you just clip it on your belt, like that's amazing. And that was done through the work of biomedical engineers. So
Yep.
like,
So definitely, yeah, that's definitely one of the cool areas of
yeah,
innovation.
yeah, geeking out
Yeah,
over here.
yeah.
Yeah. So the third thing that you do is that you are an author and you write a book series called Abby Invents. Can you tell us a little bit about what inspired you to write Abby Invents?
Yes. So that's probably one of my most proud accomplishments to date, is becoming a published author. And so the series is called Abby Invents. The first title is Abby Invents Unbreakable Crayons. And it's really a little girl who's just tired of her crayons breaking all the time. So she invents the world's first unbreakable crayons and she gets a patent at the end. And so through the book, I get to introduce kids to design thinking process, introduce them to the world of patenting. For me, I didn't know I could become an inventor until I was a graduate student. I didn't even think, I never put my name next to the word inventor until my graduate school advisor was impressed with the work I was doing and suggested that we should patent this technology. And from this experience, I don't feel like girls have to wait until they were in their 20s to know they could be an inventor. And so that's why I started writing the book. And also in graduate school for my last 2 years in the lab, I was the only woman in a lab of 17. And although I loved my professor and my colleagues, they were all truly supportive, probably one of the best teams I worked with. It never really sat well with me that, here I was doing something really cool in science, really loving what I was doing, but there are no girls. And so I wanted to write a book. It kind of reads like a letter to my younger self in some regards, because I never had books like this when I was growing up. And so the second title will be released by the end of the year. And so in the next book, Abby invents technology that's for the home. It's a household appliance that does not exist today. And she gets a patent. So it's a second patent. So in this book, in the next book, she's a bit more confident because she's done it before. And so now she is working with a cousin and he's never done it. So she's kind of egging him on and saying, you can do it. You can do it. Like, don't worry that it's failing. We'll figure it out. And so that's the premise of the second book. So you can buy the titles, autographed copies from me from tmoons.com. Because the book has been doing so well, I launched a business, Tmoons.
Okay.
And so far, we've reached over 3,500 future inventors, which to me is astounding. And I
Yeah.
keep getting these emails and photos from parents saying that their kids are tinkering at home, hopefully safely.
Yes.
So,
Hopefully with permission from their parents.
yeah, with permission. So that part's, so I really do like the author part that my career has taken on as well.
Oh no, that's awesome. And we'll share the link to your website in the event description. And I have two nieces who love to color, so I think they would really be behind Unbreakable crayons because
Super.
they definitely do break in little hands,
Yes, they do.
especially when you're coloring with passion.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah. Well, I touched on it a little bit, but you're an If Then ambassador. So can you tell us what the purpose of If Then is and what your role is as an ambassador?
Yeah, so if then, really the mission of if then is if we support a woman in STEM, then she can change the world. And so the mission of the organization is really to change the perception of who is a scientist, who is an engineer, and introduce girls to the wealth of different careers you can have as a STEM professional. So there are 125 ambassadors, and we probably span 125 different ways to be a scientist. And our ages are from, I think, 19 all the way to the early 60s. So they pulled people from different levels in their careers, just starting off for more senior professionals. And within our 125 cohort, we just have like this very strong sisterhood. I've never been part of a sisterhood of scientists or engineers before. And so for me, it's very empowering having that network and just to be able to pitch ideas to them. And as an ambassador, we choose to publicly share our stories as scientists and as an engineers and mathematicians. And me in particular, I partner with a nonprofit, Science Delivered, in San Diego. And I work with them to create new STEM trading cards, which feature, in a fun way, introducing kids, not just girls, but girls and boys, to different scientists, women and men, real scientists. And the cards are fun because you can treat it with your friends and learn about, different science professions that you never thought about before. And so that's really the mission of If Then and what I'm doing with my involvement. So yeah, definitely enjoying it right now.
Yeah, awesome. And we'll share a link to those cards as well, because those sound
Oh
really
yeah.
cool. Like
Yes, they're really
really
cool.
cool. Yeah. Yeah, we'll
They
share those as
also,
well.
yeah, the organization also works with educators, and so they have curriculums that go with the cards, and so the cards are free, I believe, to most schools. You can also choose to purchase them if you'd like, but generally it's a nonprofit, so they're free. And you can download, especially now that moms are probably acting as stay-at-home teachers. So this would be a really great resource that you don't have to think about. You just download from the web and give it to your kids. So it should be fun.
Yeah, that's Sophia and I were talking before this. My sister-in-law is homeschooling her oldest two. So hearing those, the oldest one, he really likes science. So I'm getting some ideas up here. So I'm going to be sending her this link. So
Super.
yeah, no, that's awesome. Yeah. So we've talked about a lot of different things, but what do you have a memory of like the best day that you've had as a scientist? Is there something really memorable in your career that sticks out that you can tell us a little bit about?
I have a lot of memorable moments
You can tell more
because
than one. I won't
because
tell
I've worked
anyone.
in so many different areas. I feel that there has been more than one memorable day in all of these different chapters of my life. But one memorable one, it was a fun day. So when I worked designing syringes, I had migrated a little bit to now being curious about, designing safety needles. And so I worked with a team of engineers and user experience researchers. And the intent of this particular project was, can we create a safety needle so that when nurses are administering injections to kids in pediatric wards, the kids don't see the needle and so they're not afraid of being injected. But at the same time, that needle has to be compatible with existing syringes. And the nurse has to be able to administer the drug safely to the kid without getting stuck by the needle, so preventing accidental needle stick injuries.
Mhm.
And so for several months, we had done some, market studies, and then we had a slew of different prototypes. And so that particular day, I don't know if you've seen, well, I'm sure you have seen like these shows or detective shows where the detective is interviewing the suspect and there's like a one-way mirror where
Mhm.
other detectives can look to see what's happening. Okay. So that was really the setting for that day. We had one colleague who was the brave guy to do the interview with the nurses with all our prototypes. And we had a dummy arm on the table so that the nurse could, whoever nurse was being interviewed, could play around with our prototypes and pretend she was injecting a kid. And so we could observe how she does it and see which needles worked best. So then I was part of the team behind that one-way mirror, just observing, listening to the nurse asking our colleague questions. And what made that day really, really interesting was because we had spent so many months designing these prototypes. And so this was the day when we got to see the reaction of people when they were meeting these prototypes for the first time. And because it's a prototype, it's not like it's the prettiest package, and it's more like the intent when you have a
Mhm.
prototype.
Okay.
so so between scenes, the nurses didn't realize that we were taping things together before the next nurse came along, so that it was really prototype. And what made it really entertaining was there was one particular design which we had a very strong feeling that this would not be the best design, because it hid the needle in a very long capsule. So even
Okay.
if the needle is enclosed, the nurse was like, "What is this big gadget at the end of my syringe?" And so we would be laughing in the one at the back of the mirror, but our poor colleague had to keep like a very stoic impression and pretend he had no idea which company was coming up with these designs. And
Mhm.
so it was just fascinating to see. We learned a lot from the nurse, and she would, if the nurses were super passionate, which they generally are when they're in pediatrics, they would be, having some heated conversations with her colleagues, like, who is this company making this appalling design? Like, why would you do this? And then when they found the design that they liked, they're like, oh, this is really nice. And so we would be taking all this feedback that way would help us iterate, the next
Mhm.
design, and so ultimately be able to actually create something that can be released into the market. So that was a really fun day.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, your poor colleague. He has to be an actor on top of everything.
Yeah, it was really entertaining.
Well, we've talked about some of the highlights of your job, and this isn't a bad thing, but what kind of challenges do you face in your role? And challenges aren't problems, but are there some challenges to being a biomedical engineer that you face?
Um, yeah, like you said, challenges aren't always problems. So I think for me right now in my role, because I work with colleagues across different geos, my days may sometimes be rather long or a little bit long, where we may have early morning calls at 7 a.m. with team members in Europe.
Mm.
or even customer conversations if we have customers in Europe. And the day may end in the early evening because then I'll now have to have meetings with my customers in Asia or colleagues in Asia. But because I tend to learn something new in every call, and uh, it it doesn't feel like a challenge per se. It is because it's your whole day, but you're always learning, and I like the field that I'm in healthcare. So it is a challenge that comes with the job.
Mhm.
um, but the good thing is, my colleagues are pretty flexible. So if I would choose to take, maybe an hour or 2 hours for lunch just to unplug, then I could, as long as I meet all my deliverables for that day or the month or the quarter,
Mhm.
then that's okay.
Yeah, and you get to work with people all around the world.
Yeah.
And so I've touched on this, especially with Helen Tran's interview that aired earlier this month, that she collaborates with people all over the world, and how important that is for not just her job, but lots of jobs. So it sounds like
Yeah,
you also.
getting the diverse perspectives is very important, because sometimes depending on um, like some cultures have tinier hands than others. Women have tinier hands. Like these are things that you have to think about in different technologies. With AI, for instance, how do you make sure that you are creating artificial intelligence technologies that are encompassing or of people of different backgrounds? And so yeah, it is very insightful, those discussions, what you learn. So yeah.
Yeah, and to flip it, so to go from challenges to, what are some of your favorite things about being a biomedical engineer?
Favorite things, knowing that, my work can impact the lives of millions around the world. As I said, right now I'm working in medical imaging. And so even if we come up with one architecture for an ultrasound customer or CAT scan customer, um, if we're given permission to not only use that solution with company A, but also can, share it with company B, then it's one architecture, but
Mhm.
it's going to be in, hundreds or thousands of equipment that ultimately touch lives all corners of the world. And so that part, I think, is very empowering. So it makes you see the impacts, the clinical impact of your work. And so if you're having a bad day, you know that ultimately what you're trying to drive towards is something that's going to be helpful. So I like the aspect of using technology for good.
Yeah,
And so biomedical engineering, I think that's definitely one of the pros of biomedical engineering.
yeah, I'm very pro biomedical engineering. Yes. um, so if anyone is interested in learning more about biomedical engineering, what kind of resources are out there that you could recommend?
That's so because the field is so broad. It's almost as if you need a resource for every subspecialty within biomedical engineering. But I'd say if you want a 50,000-foot introduction to the field, Khan Academy, KHAN, they have a lot of great videos on YouTube. TED Talks on TED.com. I love TED Talks, and so in 10 minutes, 12 minutes, you can learn a lot about what someone is doing within biomedical engineering. If you within biomedical engineering, there are also some other if-then ambassadors who focus more on microbes and tissue engineering. So Dr. Anna Maria Porras, she's a biomedical engineer, and so she crochet and she loves crocheting. So she crochets microbes,
Okay.
and she has a very popular Microbe Mondays on Twitter and Instagram,
Okay.
where she posts something she crocheted, like a microbe she crocheted, like she's crocheted COVID, for instance, and she'll give like a brief blurb as to, what does this microbe do. I think her intent of starting this sort of science communication through crocheting was
Mhm.
really to show people that not all microbes are bad, because she is in that field. And so that's a fun way of getting kids to learn a little bit more about microbes.
Yeah.
So I think those are some of the highlights.
Yeah.
There's also another resource, teachengineering.org. And so they are definitely more for teachers, but I guess now moms are staying at home. So maybe for moms as well, and dads, sorry, dads.
Yeah.
Um, and so this resource has lots of great curriculum on different elements within biomedical engineering. So I think that would be helpful too.
Awesome. And we'll list all of those resources in the event description for anyone who wants to go and learn some more. And the last question I'm going to turn over to Sophia to ask.
Okay, so my question is, what advice would you give to young women and girls who are interested in a STEM-related field?
It's a great question, Sophia. I would say, keep swimming and just do it. Yesterday we lost notorious RBG, and one of the quotes that she says is, "Women belong in all areas where decisions are made." And I feel, as a girl or a young woman, we all use technology. I mean, we're talking on Zoom today, most likely from your laptop. You probably have tablets or a cell phone. You watch TV. There's no reason why women can be involved in, innovating the new technologies that we use. And even if you're a woman or a girl who loves fashion, I love fashion too. But even there are areas where fashion meets tech. There are apps now where we use to purchase clothes. So if you're a woman who loves fashion, then you know which app you love the best, because it presents the thing you want to buy in such an engaging way. And so I think there are opportunities for women at all levels of science in all areas. And so I would say just do it. And even if you stumble along the way, which you most likely will, what you have to remember that a failure is a success if you learn something from it. So for me, my invention that I spoke about at the beginning of the call, now it sounds great that I invented this cancer diagnostic test, but it's not like I woke up one day and bam, here it was. There was a period of 2 years where my experiments were 2 or 3 years where my experiments were failing miserably, and I wanted to quit and give up a lot of times. But my advisor would tell me that whenever I presented data and felt that maybe I wasn't good enough to be a PhD student or good enough to be a biomedical engineer, he would say, well, the science, the data is telling you something, but maybe you're trying to force the data the way you want the data to look. So look at the data and ask yourself if you're asking the data the right question. Like, what is the data telling you? And I thought that that's probably one of the best advice I've ever gotten from a mentor. Because now when I get my results, I mean, even in the work I do today, if my results are not matching my initial hypothesis, it doesn't mean that it's bad data. It's data. And so it's just, what is the data telling me? And do I now refine my hypothesis? And what do I do now? And so I think if you change your mindset, the way you approach science is more exploratory, and then you have fun no matter what results you get. So hopefully that helped.
Thank you. I definitely think that we need more of like the female perspective in STEM fields.
Yes, we do.
Yep. Well, that wraps up our interview with Arlyne Simon. Arlyne, thank you for joining us today.
Thank you, Emily, and nice to meet you, Sophia.
Nice to meet you. Thank you for coming. It was really
Bye.
Thank you. And thank everyone for watching, and we'll see you next time.